After e4, c5, knight c3, bishop c5 and f4, we're playing the Vienna Gambit. Earlier in the previous videos we went through variations like knight c6, d6 and stuff like that. We still have to go through a few of them, but in this video I'll focus on this usual idea. A lot of players play it. So bishop takes knight. It's not crazy at all, because then rook takes back, but then queen h4 is a fork, attacks the king and wins the pawn. So if you're wondering what to do in this situation is how to escape, this is going to be a video about that. Now we have to play g3, attacking the queen. And the queen, well, the queen didn't come to h4 for nothing, so the queen will have to go and take the pawn. If the queen goes back, then that's just going to be pointless, and then white will go on with development, and black will have achieved nothing. So queen takes h2. Now the black player is thinking he might have won a pawn. We have to play rook g2 now, because the rook was under attack, and we couldn't really move this bishop, because then the rook is just not protected. So rook g2 attacks the queen, and now the queen has to move. Let's see. Queen h1 is really not good, because white will now play d4. This is the idea. Black can just play something like pawn takes or d6, for example, to get the bishop out. The main idea is to play h3 with the bishop. Let's look at pawn takes first of all, very quickly. The main reason why queen h1 is not good is because the queen is just trapping herself. Eventually the queen might be able to go to h6 again, but like that's a waste of tempo. So let's say pawn take, for example, we take back with the queen, we have an attack on g7, trying to trap the rook. Also, we're always going to be able to play something like bishop e3 and long castle with excellent development. So let's say black tries to castle, try to get some safety. Knight f6 is met by knight to d5. So there's an attack on the pawn, and the black player is only up a pawn. We're trying to go up a rook here, and if the knight takes, we do have an attack on g7, and when the rook moves, we can take this, and we have just a massive attack, and that's unstoppable unless black wants to sacrifice just everything he has. The idea is to play rook e2 check, and that's going to be game over in a couple of moves. The best move by black in this situation is queen h5 with an attack on e2 to sacrifice for the rook. So that's the engine's response to that. So in this position, after knight d5, I just wanted to mention that the attack on this pawn cannot be simply stopped by developing something else. Like, it looks like knight a6 might be played. It stops the threat of the knight, and then black can keep things like this and play maybe and potentially go towards a normal endgame, but that loses immediately because of queen e5 check. So that's a massive threat. Considering white's center, of course we were going to have more attack than our opponent. Our opponent just moved the queen a little bit too much. King moving to d8 gives a checkmate here. King moving here, well, it's just a checkmate a little bit slower, and that's it. So in this position, so let's say, for example, d6, we can just go and take the rook. There's no compensation for black, like either in development or anything else. We just take the rook. And a move like bishop h3 here is nothing to worry about, because rook g1, the rook is protected. These are just ideas, and the position is being like +7 for a few moves already, so we can move on to the next scenario. If black plays here a normal move like knight c6, we can take the knight with check, pawn takes, and then queen takes back. And now we're attacking the rook, so the rook will have to move. A move like rook to g8, putting the rook in an open file, also in order not to smother it behind the pawn. And now white plays f5. The idea is to play bishop to f4, developing the bishop, and long castle. We don't have to worry about our queen being taken away from this square, because it cannot be attacked. Queen h4 or h6 are just not possible. f5 also stops the rook from going to g6 with an attack on the queen, just in case. The black player now is completely paralyzed. He will not be able to castle because the queen is attacking these crucial squares. Will not be able to activate the rook or attack the queen. And the queen has got this lovely diagonal, so the knight can't really go and make any threat. Move like knight to b4 is not really threatening the c2 square because of the rook. So if knight b4, bishop f4, just normal development. Long castle and bishop c4 are coming, and yeah, white's position is like +10 on the evaluation. It's also because the queen is completely trapped. Even if the queen were to go to h5, then that would have meant that black wasted too many tempos with the queen, and even from h5 the queen will not be able to challenge the position of our queen in any way. Queen g6, h6, none of these moves are possible. and neither an attempt of swapping because we have too much attack on g5. So the attack is crashing. So in this scenario now, after rook g2 and the queen goes to g1, d4, earlier we went through pawn takes, which just gives us more development. After the best move, which is d6, white plays f5. The idea is to block this bishop, make it unable to go to h3, and also to stop the queen from potentially going to h6, reducing the freedom of the black queen. Right now there's literally no squares where the black queen can go to and be safe. h5 is controlled by the queen. After a move like knight f6 and black might try to castle, white takes the pawn in the center. And the only move that makes sense is to take back. It was an attack on the knight, and so now bishop g5 is the move. We're threatening obviously to double up the pawn here and make the king unable to castle this side of the board without huge problems. If the knight is protected with the other knight, which makes sense, white continues development with queen d2. We're not saying these moves so that we can all remember all of them by heart, but we're just trying to understand that queen h1 here was such a mistake because we're going to paralyze the position of the black player, especially after a move like f5, which was also seen before. So that's thematic in this opening and also in the previous videos. After queen d2, obviously the idea is to castle long side and then play a move like bishop c4, develop. So now let's have a look at two ideas, castling and pawn to h6. If black wants to get rid of this bishop, pawn to h6 is just met by bishop h4, and then a move like g5 is met by pawn takes, en passant, and then pawn takes back, and now we castle. So we move on with development. g5 now, why am I playing these moves? Because, well, g5 traps the bishop, right? So I'm playing these moves because black might have two potential ideas. One of them is h6 g5, which we're going through right now, which is an attempt of counter-attacking and reducing the initiative of the white player. The other one is castle, but let's go through this now. We're going to play knight to d5, ignoring the bishop. The idea is to take the knight, and after knight takes, we can infiltrate the queen in d8, and it's massive attack. So after knight takes, to prevent all of that, we take back. And now the advantage is just too much. The idea is to play queen e6, check, and if the king moves to d8, then check again. The knight is pinned, we're going to take the rook. There's a checkmate soon as well. If the queen check and then king goes to f8, we're going to play rook f2. And it's going to be a checkmate very soon. Oh, this is all to say if the pawn takes the bishop, we can do that immediately. Well, so this is the plan. This is what we're going for. So if pawn takes bishop, all of this with queen e6 will happen. A move like knight c5 to protect the square e6 is simply met by the queen going to d8 with a check. There's a skewer. You can take the rook. You can develop the rook to f2 as well. So a move like rook h7 to kind of blockade here just doesn't work because of queen g8, which wins the rook. Earlier we went through h6 and that idea. Let's try castle. We castle as well, and our development is complete. The position, we have an advantage of about +7, and why are we looking at all of these scenarios? It's just so we familiarize with how to play against this specific variation and understand the flaws of playing the bishop takes g1 variation. A move like h6, for example, now is met by rook to h2. So here's where the black player went wrong in this situation. When he played queen to h1 move, he kind of imprisoned his own best piece. And in the attempt of preserving the pawn structure, for example, he made this bishop, this light square bishop, less valuable. Also, the f5 move was the best move to stop this bishop from being able to do anything. So after rook h2, the queen will have to move. And now either the queen goes to g1 or to f3, nothing changes, because after this move we can take the pawn. We're going to be winning the exchange here. If not, we still have an idea also of sacrificing the bishop, and then queen h6 is coming in. If pawn takes, then this is an unstoppable. The black player will have to sacrifice the queen to stop this. But I think we've had enough of that variation, so let's just go through the next one very quickly. Bishop c5, f4, and so they can try this idea. And this is something that happened against me many times against players of lots of different ratings. The thing is, they try to confuse you, they try to create some chaos. But if you play accurately, if you remember just a few moves, and especially the scenarios that we've been going through, then this move is not supposed to be a problem. Rook takes and then queen check, g3 is the move, attack the queen. Queen goes to h2 and then we attack the queen again. So if the queen does not go to h1, which is a move where the queen is kind of trapped, After queen h3, the move is the same, d4, and just a similar scenario. Let's just quickly go through pawn takes. Here we play knight e5 immediately. The difference is that queen h3 is able to go to e6, potentially c6, and give a little bit of protection to c7, to many other squares near the king. So if we play queen takes pawn in d4, the black player might go back with the queen and again and offer just a lot of protection. A move like queen takes g7 wouldn't work because of queen f6, attacking the queen and defending the rook in diagonal. The queen wouldn't be able to go to any of these squares, so it's not our best attacking chance. You have to play knight e5 to immediately attack c7, and the queen now cannot go to e6 because queen c7. Now best move by black is king to d8. Let's try to understand. Knight a7, knight a6 now protecting c7 doesn't work because of queen d4. So here it's literally like the previous scenario that we went through a few minutes ago. The idea is to take g7. In this case, the queen will still not be able to go to e6. So the brilliancy of the move knight e5 was also because it stopped the queen from going to f6. So if queen e6 now, queen g7, and the idea of queen f6 to attack the queen and let the whites attack fade doesn't work because we have a knight this time. In this position, as we said, best move is king to d8. And now we still take the pawn. Let's have a look at this idea this time. Also because, well, knight f6 is met by knight takes, and then pawn takes, and then queen f6 is a fork winning the game. So let's have a look at this idea, f6. White now play queen c5. Yeah, we have an attack on f8 and on c7. f8 will be checkmate, so black will have to prioritize that by playing the best move, which is queen h5, with the idea of going back to e8 in case. White continues with queen c7, king has to move to the only square available, queen wins bishop, king f7, bishop to c4, and it's game over. So here again, we played f6 and we saw what went wrong. Let's have a look at knight e7, just another potential idea. The idea is if queen g7, rook g8 comes with an attack on the queen. So the best move now is knight takes e7, king takes back because we're up a piece. Queen to g7 is played now, and the rook doesn't have access to g8, so the rook will have to go to, let's say, e8, just to make an example. White continues with f5. The idea is to play bishop g5, which would be checkmate in like 4 moves. Bishop g5, king moves, queen check, king moves, and then queen check, and then this. So to stop all of this, x6 doesn't really work because you can just take the pawn. And you still have the same threat. The pawn is pinned, and this queen is paralyzed. This a4 protecting f5 is crucial as well to stop the queen from really having any access anywhere. So there's basically nothing. Well, basically, pawn to h6 is the best move according to the engine, and we still are going to take it and then carry on with the same plan. Alright, the last position we're going to look at, and then we're done with this chapter. We can move on to the next. From the next video, we're going to look at many other variations. Bishop takes, rook takes, queen h3, and then queen takes pawn. Remember that this is not supposed to be working. So don't panic and just learn a few moves and just remember how to continue, and you will be able to crush any player that tries this because it's just not supposed to work. Rook g2, queen h3, d4. The best move is d6. We went through pawn takes, but let's have a look at d6. White now doesn't play f5. As you might have noticed, obviously f5 wouldn't make sense now because we don't have to stop the threat of bishop here, of bishop h3. So knight d5 is the move now. We immediately go for that pawn. So let's have a look at this more defensive move, queen to d7, kind of protecting just as much as possible near the king and trying to give black an equal game. And black is thinking, okay, I went there to h2, grab the pawn, and I'm going to continue the game with the extra pawn. Well, no, because we're still ahead in development. This type of move here just gave us an open file for the rook. The rook is able to reach any of these squares, especially when the central files will open. And the white player hasn't really had his castle ruined because he can castle alongside. So that was useless. Now we continue with best move, pawn takes pawn. And now black will continue with c6 because taking the pawn back is a move that is met by queen h5. Queen h5 is typical pattern. When you want to put pressure on the e5 pawn, and you're pinning the f7 pawn, so this pawn cannot defend like that. The queen cannot move to e6 to defend the pawn because knight c7 wins the queen. Queen e7 is not possible because of the knight. g6 is the worst because you can take this and then with the rook. This move might potentially be met with knight c6, which looks very logical, but there's a huge problem with that. The problem is that black doesn't want to be deprived of the possibility to play c6, and now this knight is blocking the c6 move, and so this knight is there to stay, and he cannot be attacked by a pawn. And after knight c6, white continues with pawn takes. The idea of playing e6 is crashing, because if queen takes, we still have knight c7, and the pawn can't take back, and the queen can't move. It's going to be a disaster. And a move like g6 now might be played. The queen doesn't have access to e5, but there's a lot of weaknesses in the black territory. We're going to play queen f3 with the threat of e6. If it was our move again now, we will play e6 immediately. That's our threat. And queen e6 cannot be played. So let's say pawn takes will be met by rook f2, going for this. And there's no defense because, well, the queen can't go to e7, f7, because it will be taken everywhere else. And if the queen goes to g7, then knight check, queen takes, the queen can take or the king can move. If the queen takes, we have queen check, king moves to the only square, and now rook to d2. It's going to be checkmate very soon. The king cannot go anywhere. It's going to have to start sacrificing stuff, like queen to c5 for just to start. Or maybe knight to d4, but then rook takes and king moves again, and the game is becoming a little bit of a joke. Rook c4 will be skewing the king. So after e6, and well, this is the threat we're going for. We're going to play rook f2, and if queen g7, knight takes. If king moves, we can simply take the rook. We're up in material quite a lot. We have a very good position, and there's no compensation for black because this knight is not going to get trapped. You have the option of bishop f4. You also have the option of swapping here, which makes your life easier. In this position, after queen f3, what happens if black plays knight to d4, attacking the queen? I don't know, maybe preparing c6. How do we exploit this? Queen to c3. The idea is to attack the knight and to go for c7 and win the rook. So now we're offering more support over the square c7. And we're absolutely winning here because what can black do? If black cannot stop the threat of e6. If the knight goes back, or if let's have a look at this pawn. Let's say black wants to trade everything. You say, like, I'll take my knight, I'll take your knight. The problem is now we play e6. This is a thematic. We're attacking the queen. The queen can't move anywhere near here. And the problem is that the black will have to do something about this pawn. Either take or moving the queen maybe back or up, something like that. The thing is, we're going to take the knight and it's going to come with an attack on the rook. So black will not be able to take the knight back. And so the c6 pawn move loses a piece. A move like knight back to c6 allows e6 anyway, because we're going to take the rook. Black will have to deal with this attack of the pawn. No matter what, we will take the rook. So, very last recap, so that we can close this video. f4 and bishop takes, rook takes, queen h4 check, winning the pawn for the moment, rook g2, the queen will have to go to h3. And now d4. d6 is the best move. Anyway, we play knight to d5 and queen d7. The variation that we're looking at now, that seems to be protecting everything, is met by pawn takes. We saw why taking back was wrong, because our development is so much better. Let's have a look at c6, attacking our knight, trying to get rid of this very powerful knight. Knight goes back to e3 now. And we have a strong attack on d6, so we're threatening to take the pawn in d6 and get a passed pawn. Then supported, we're going to have a pawn chain here that is tremendous. So let's have a look at pawn takes, which makes sense. Black is offering a swap of queens, and it's not like breaking his pawn structure. It's trying to simplify the game, and it's also trying to prevent, of course, the pawn from being taken for free. Now we play rook to d2. We come with an attack on the queen will have to move. Best move is queen to c7. We have aligned our two pieces, queen and rook, in the same file. They're doing a good job together. And our best move now is knight to c4. We're trying to go to this d6 square, exploiting the fact that the black bishop, the dark square bishop, is not there anymore. Meaning that this dark square near the king will be targetable. We will love to sit there with our knight. Black doesn't have any move to actually stop that from happening, and the best move according to the engine is h5. Let's have a look at something like knight e7 to make black castle, for example. We play knight d6 check, so black can't castle, not even manually. After king f8, we can take this bishop. That was basically the plan. We're up a piece, and if queen takes back, we have this. So after best move h5, knight d6 check, king e7, and now knight takes doesn't really work because the queen will take back and we don't have anything afterwards. Best move now is to take the pawn, support the knight a little bit further, and our idea now, the goal is to play queen f3 with an attack on f7. Best move by black now though is bishop to g4, stopping all of that. So how do we respond now? We respond with this beautiful move, rook to f2, completely careless of the queen because our development is so good they allow us to not worry about material anymore. This now cannot be stopped. Let's have a look at knight f6, for example, that stops this from happening. Black might think, okay, well, I'm attacking this knight, so if pawn takes, and pawn takes, for example, I still have an attack on the queen, the bishop is safe, and then I'm going to take this knight. Knight f6 stops the rook from infiltrating and allows black to develop the rook. So it looks like a possible idea, but then we're going to play queen d4. We saved our queen, and now black will have a knight hanging, and whatever the knight will move, we will be able to play rook to f7 with a crashing attack that leads to checkmate soon. So here, after bishop to g4, knight f6 doesn't work. What happens after bishop takes the queen? How do we go on? Rook f7 check. We don't have a queen anymore, so the black player might think we might not be able to organize a checkmate. So after king d8, bishop g5 check. Now the king cannot move anywhere. He's going to have to play knight to e7. And the rook very quietly takes the bishop in d1. And we don't really need the queen in this position. We've got too much attack going on. The idea now is to play bishop to h3. We can take the pawn in g7. And the bishop to h3 is also attacking c8 more. So the knight b5 comes with a very strong checkmate threat. And yeah, position here is completely crashing, winning for white. So just a couple of moves ago, after we played bishop to g5, it's check. Black could have played knight f6 instead of knight to e7. We still do play that move, rook to d1, and we're threatening discover checks. Knight b5 is always going to be available, and the knight's currently defending the rook, so you don't have to worry. And best move by black now, even though the position is lost, is knight b to d7. We're going to take the knight with the bishop, because it comes with a check, it forces a reply. Pawn takes, and now pawn up. So we will remove the knight forcefully, and if he doesn't, we're just going to take. And whenever it does, we have a discover check. Best move by black now is rook to e8, of course. Removing the knight wouldn't have made any sense. Rook check, and after queen takes, only move. Black might think of playing an endgame with two rooks against rook, knight, and bishop. And also, you know, it's coming with an attack on this pawn. The king might take the pawn if we take the queen. So now the best move is knight to b7 check, winning one more pawn. King c8, and now the rook can take this. And yeah, white's winning here. A move like rook e6 is met by rook to h7. The idea is to play bishop h3 and win this rook. The funny thing is that the rook cannot go to e8, for example, because knight d6 wins the rook. Cannot go to e7 and neither d6 because of the knight. Cannot go to e5 because of knight to d6 check. And if the king moves, then we got a skewer winning the rook, and if the king moves here, we got a checkmate. If in this position the rook takes the pawn with the check, we play king f2, and now there's a threat of knight d6 winning the rook. So after rook to d4, we play bishop h3, and we block the king from going to c8, and king moves. And the last move I'm going to show is knight a5. The king cannot go anywhere because of our pieces. This rook cannot play, and any check of the rook here would be met by the king approaching the rook. And it's gonna be pointless to try and stop the white player from doing a checkmate in b7.